Good evening, folks, and thanks for joining us. My name is Ray Starling. I work at your statewide Chamber of Commerce out of Raleigh, but I've got two folks here on the screen with me beaming in, if you will, from Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us. The Chamber is the state's largest broad-based business organization. At the end of the day, what we do here at your statewide chamber is to try to work to establish an environment so that North Carolina can be a national leader for private sector job growth. We like to point out the accolades that our state has. I'm sure Congressman Davis and Congressman Rouzer brag about them too. We've been recognized now 2 years in a row as the very best state in the country in which to do business. That did not happen by accident. In fact, the two gentlemen that you're about to meet momentarily have also been a part of the work that helped to get us there. It takes thinking about our tax environment. It takes thinking about our state's fiscal stability, our education system, our infrastructure, our regulatory environment, and even our legal system and the folks that we put on the bench in this state. All of them are a part of our state's business environment. But the question remains, can we stay there? Can we continue to be a state that's the number one state in the country to do business? Our fear is that we can't. That is, unless we continue to apply that same level of intentionality as we have to the past, and that intentionality around what policies we develop and adopt to apply to our citizenry. That means being intentional about pushing back on regulations that literally shrink the number of jobs that we have in our state. And that's what our ag future is all about, trying to avoid that result and reminding folks that actions like menthol bans, labor regulations in agriculture, and certain environmental rules all come with trade-offs. So we'll discuss tonight, this evening, how the regulatory environment, particularly at the federal level, is impacting North Carolina agriculture. And we'll open things up to you to go a little deeper with your questions. And in fact, if you see on your screen, you should be able to scroll down and you can submit a question for the two congressmen that I'm going to introduce in just a second. We'd also encourage you to scroll down on that screen and leave us your email if you'd like to get updates from the chamber regarding our Ag Future campaign. Let me start by introducing Congressman David Rouzer, who represents the 7th Congressional District down in Southeast North Carolina, basically from the coastline of Southeast North Carolina westward and northward up through Lumberton and up just south of Fayetteville. David is Congressman Rouzer, I should say, is an NC State graduate. He actually got 3 degrees from NC State, one of which was in chemistry. I don't think I remembered that until this evening. He also served shortly after that as a member of the Dean's leadership team for the North Carolina State College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. He was a longtime staffer for Senator Helms, a very key aide to Senator Dole, and he's even been in business on his own. He was in the North Carolina Senate for 2 terms, representing the community where he worked on a family farm during the summers, one that happened to be in Johnston County. And perhaps most relevant here this evening, he's currently a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, obviously, but also they're a member of the U.S. House Agriculture Committee and the U.S. House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, where he is actually the chair of a subcommittee responsible for water resources and environmental regulation and oversight. So a real friend of agriculture, Congressman Rouzer, pleasure to have you on board tonight, and we look forward to your comments here in just a moment. I'd like to also introduce a good friend, Congressman Don Davis. He represents North Carolina's 1st Congressional District. And gentlemen, I did look to see that with all the redistricting that happens, you actually get to keep your numbers. Now, I know nobody actually cares about the number of the district. They just wonder where it is. But Congressman Davis, I think you may have landmass wise one of the largest districts in the state. And, also a product of a farming community, Snow Hill out in Greene County, worked on a tobacco farm growing up. I think that must have really motivated you like it did Congressman Rouzer as well, because in your case, you went on to the United States Air Force Academy. You became a commissioned officer. You served in the Air Force for 8 years. You've been on the faculty at East Carolina University, mentoring thousands of students over a 20-year tenure there. And in addition to your bachelor's from the U.S. Air Force Academy, a master's degree from Central Michigan, and a doctoral degree from East Carolina. Politically, Congressman Davis was the youngest ever mayor of the town of Snow Hill at age 29. That was just a couple of years ago, right, Congressman? But he's also served in the state Senate for about 6 terms, and in 2022 was elected to the United States House for that large district in sort of eastern and northeastern North Carolina. Also a member of the U.S. House Ag Committee, and which totally makes sense given his background in the Air Force, also a member of the House Armed Services Committee. So these gentlemen, and I was reminded in looking at their resumes and all they've done in their short lives so far, they are so qualified. I'm frankly not sure why they chose to become members of Congress, but I'm glad that both of them did. So I want to begin by giving both of you just a few moments to make some opening remarks. And of course, to thank you for the work that you're doing on regulatory issues, particularly those impacting agriculture and farmers and agribusinesses in our state. So Congressman Rouzer, we'll start with you, and you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Ray, and great to have all your listeners and viewers on tonight as well. Great to be with my friend Don Davis. You mentioned my stint in the state Senate. His stint and my stint overlapped a couple of years there. So Don and I have actually known each other for a good long while, and anyhow, it's been good to have him on the other side of the aisle, to have a good friend and individual to work with on a lot of these issues that, quite frankly, if we're going to make real progress, it really means they have to be bipartisan as well. Any kind of lasting reform always has to be bipartisan. So it's good to have my buddy Don with us, and he and I work very closely together on the House Agriculture Committee and on other matters as well. So, agriculture has been an engine for North Carolina's economy for a long, long time, since the very beginning. It's a $100 billion plus industry now, and anybody who grew up in Eastern North Carolina or has been in North Carolina for any length of time, I think recognizes just how important agriculture is to the economy of the state. Even though we're becoming more and more suburban, more and more urban, all the time. A lot of folks, moving into the state. But that doesn't take away from the importance of agriculture. In fact, it makes agriculture that much more important. And you talk about rules and regulations, whether it's H2A rules and regulations, or whether it's waters of the U.S., for example, that impact our farmers, that impacts consumers directly, that impacts every citizen of North Carolina in the form of higher cost in many cases. A lot of people wonder, well, why are food prices high? There are a lot of reasons why, but one of it is the excessive burden of regulation. And that, the old saying, time is money. It truly is. A lot of these rules and regulations make it very difficult to produce what we need to produce, delay the delivery and everything else. And then in the case of the H2A program, many of the farmers that are listening understand how important labor is. And for those that aren't familiar with agriculture and the H2A program, that's basically the legal guest worker program, where farmers, through the help of third parties in a lot of cases, will bring folks from across the border who want to come and work legally, and they're paid a certain amount. Housing is covered, transportation is covered, and everything else, and gives them an opportunity to thrive back home in their home country. They come here and then they go right back. And so there's a lot that goes into production agriculture that affects the consumer, that the average citizen really knows very, very little about. And so I appreciate the opportunity today to highlight some of those issues and some of those challenges.
Look forward to talking more about that, Congressman Rouzer. And Congressman Davis, some opening comments as you see fit.
Well, hello, Ray. It's so good to see you, and to all of the members who are chiming in tonight. Thank you for joining us. And to my good friend David, we've known each other for a long time, and I never knew, Ray, he was actually a chemist. I learned something new today.
Well, I have to admit, I kind of forgot about the chemistry degree too.
I'm not sure why he stopped with 3 degrees, Congressman. Might as well have gone on 4 or 5.
Yeah, I'd had enough punishment at that point.
Well, but I can definitely tell you that my pathway to Congress, I enjoyed so many of our conversations in the state Senate together, and my friend came to the Congress. I said, "Hey, something's good must be going on. I need to figure out what it is." So it took me a few extra years, but I came up nevertheless. But let me say to the core, to everyone listening, just so you can get to know me better. I was born and raised in Greene County, Snow Hill, North Carolina. Born to the core Eastern North Carolina, and essentially I left to come back after serving my country. But this is what I know. Raised in Eastern North Carolina, we grew up. Agriculture was just so much part of our way of life. Everything evolved around what was taking place in the field, school start dates, everything was evolving around what happened within the agriculture community. And it taught me so many valuable lessons in life. But this is what has stood out to me mostly. And that is, it seemed like I've seen the good days, and I remember those good days, and also understand too the challenges when we're not careful in terms of the regulatory burdens that are placed on us. Ray, you talked also part of the component here, this legal apparatus that exists and we have to pay attention to. We've seen literally, I would say, an industry almost crippled.
Sure.
And for me, this is personal. I mean, this is how I paid for school supplies and school clothes. I mean, it was just so much ingrained into our way of life. And to now look to see after generations how we've been impacted. And I'm telling you right now, I mean, the farming community in particular should be commended for turning lemons into lemonade here and getting pounded every way they turn often. And then in Eastern North Carolina, I mean, so often we just felt left behind in this process. So my journey here to Congress is one in which I'm reminded of where I came from and the impact and implications that bad policies, bad legal decisions, in my opinion, have had on the industry, on us, and it has impacted arguably generations now. Even though we are resilient, and I'm proud of the resiliency, because we are still, out of all that's taken place over the decades, still the number one industry in our state. And that speaks volumes. It really speaks volumes to everyone that's joining in, for us making it a priority, not just agriculture, agribusiness, and those who are dedicated to advancing businesses, creating real opportunities. And for me, this is also important because as I've come to Congress, I want to say this. I'm so honored to be able to be here. My grandmother raised me, and I would never forget the time of actually going to her table at times. And I just admit to everyone here, I came from humble beginnings. And I remember times she would come and say, "Baby, have you had enough to eat?" And sometimes I would ask for more. And to go from that to being able to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives, to serve on the Agriculture Committee, and coming in on our side to have the trust of the committee members to serve as the vice ranking member, to go from a kid just going to his grandma to get extra food to now being here front and center, working with people like David Rouzer, I mean, who just are so dedicated in their service and helping to really frame decisions as it pertains to how we feed and clothe the American people and beyond. To me, this is so humbling, and I really appreciate everything. I look forward tonight to this conversation. Obviously, there's so many important topics, as David has already begun to hit on, Farm Bill, work. And I just want to plant a seed, if I may, Ray, and we'll wind down right here. I'm honored that our chair, who, by the way, we were able to join the chair in Davis District, and it was great to have him in North Carolina GT, our ag chair. And when we talk in particular about labor, this is a topic that I've heard all over in all 19 counties, people who've raised this concern, trying to figure out what in the world is going on with the Department of Labor. And I would simply say, when we put this whole thing in perspective, and this is some numbers coming out of the U.S. Chamber, I mean, you're talking about out there about 9.8 million jobs that right now are vacant. And then we're talking about 5.9 million people who are actively unemployed, but are not discouraged enough, but they're identifying themselves as unemployed.
Looking, so to speak.
Yeah, and the point that I make is, do the math on this. We got to stop and do the math on this. If you went to zero unemployment right now, there would still be vacancies that exist. And then when we translate this specifically, David, to ag, we know those numbers, over 371,000 ag positions that are vacant. I would argue that the time is more important for us to have these conversations, because after all, I mean, this is how we feed and clothe the American people. So thank you so much for
well said.
Part of this conversation tonight, and I look forward to
well, it's clear in just hearing your opening comments, both of you, that you agree on a lot, and I kind of want to start by teeing up. You actually agreed so much on one item that you went together and wrote a letter to the President of the United States. And, there's letters written in D.C. all the time, but it's pretty rare that folks on both sides of the aisle would come together and write a sitting president about a regulation that was being considered by his administration. And that relates to the FDA menthol ban. I thought I'd just ask, and again, maybe back to you, Congressman Rouzer. You all said some things in that letter about the job impact that this regulation could have. I thought you both also did a nice job pointing out, as you've talked about here, the sort of social and cultural impact that the loss of this potential industry could have on the state. And so what led to that? I mean, how did two gentlemen on opposite sides of the aisle end up writing a letter to the president and opposing a proposal put forward by FDA? Talk about that, if you will, Congressman Rouzer.
Yeah, well, I think Don and I both recognize how important tobacco still is to the agriculture economy and to the broader economy as a whole, and particularly in Eastern North Carolina. When the FDA comes out and says they're going to ban menthol cigarettes, well, that's a direct attack on every North Carolina farm family that produces tobacco, and so it's a strong overreach by the FDA. Any type of sweeping rule like that should have congressional approval. It shouldn't be just by executive action or fiat, if you want to call it that. And so we gladly joined together. And again, to make progress in this town, particularly if you're me and the other party is in the White House, it's very advantageous to have a bipartisan letter sent to the president and the administration explaining how this goes beyond politics. This directly impacts a number of families, not only in the cigarette industry, but also directly affects our farmers. And in the case of menthol, there's many in the African American community that Don can speak to even better than I can. Where there's a direct linkage there. This is a product of choice, for many of them. That and they are adults and a legal product, and same case we've made for eons now with the attack on the tobacco industry. The one thing I want to say about tobacco, it's interesting to me the day and time we live in, where tobacco is demonized, but pot is celebrated. And I just think in so many cases in this country and around the world, everybody's looking around saying, what in the hell happened? Everything's turned on its head. You go to San Francisco, you're locked up for smoking a cigarette. If you're smoking a joint or any other kind of drug, you're just fine. So it's just beyond me that we've gotten to this point in this country. And this whole war on tobacco is one of the reasons why you have all this vaping and so much other stuff that teenagers and others are inhaling today, and you don't even know what's in it. And so I really think in this country, we need to get back to the moral and spiritual principles that made it great. We need to get back to the basics and back to common sense. And this is just an example of where I think the country is going awry.
That's great, Congressman Rouzer. And then Congressman Davis, just sort of building off that, he teed up a lot there. I mean, one, looking back at your letter, the menthol cigarette industry is responsible for 27,000 jobs in North Carolina alone. And the production and sale of the cigarettes account for 6,000 of them, with more than 2,000 in manufacturing, something we have to remind people about here all the time, that North Carolina is still a manufacturing state. But we won't be with this kind of regulation. Just your take. And I also would just add, in one of the quotes from your office, you mentioned, again, these trade-offs of regulation, that one of them might be more illicit tobacco products on the market. I thought that was interesting. Talk about that, and again, why you would join up with Congressman Rouzer to broach this issue.
Right. Let me say, truly was a pleasure to team up with David to work together on this and other issues too. And we're going to have to continue to work together through the Farm Bill. I'm looking forward to that. But on this issue, let me go back to something that's near and dear to me, and I believe near and dear to the chamber as well. And that's at the core, education. I have 19 counties in the current first congressional district. And I started at the beginning of my term, making my way around to all 19 counties, talking to students. And because in Eastern North Carolina, this is something that has become, unfortunately, part of our norm. So many young people, they're walking across graduation stages, and the first thing they want to do is leave. I can't wait to leave. And so I was just curious. I mean, why in the masses? I was in one setting at a school. There are nearly 100 kids in the room, and it was an early college. This is the cream of the crop. And I asked the question, how many of you plan on staying in Eastern North Carolina or going off to school and maybe coming back and working or becoming an entrepreneur and having your family here in the East? Out of almost 100 kids, it wasn't exactly 100, but almost 100, 4 kids raised their hands. They're ready to leave at the masses. And here's where I'm heading in all of this. I wanted to get to the core of this. And I started then asking kid after kid, what is it that'll keep you in Eastern North Carolina? What is it? No matter where I was, if it was Berkeley County, Perquimans, Pitt County, Greene County, Nash County, Wilson County, no matter where I was, it all came down and they said the same thing. They're feeling the lack of opportunities, of a real opportunity, being able to work and make a living. And where I'm heading here is you can't give up 6,000 jobs and expect that we're going to grow in the East and really be able to live and realize the American dream. And I'm not ready to give up that we can live the American dream in Eastern North Carolina as well. The alternative shouldn't be that I feel I have to leave to go somewhere else. And it starts then by fighting tooth and nail to keep every single job that we have. And you can't get rid of 6,000 jobs. And then I look at the administration. They're now teeing up the chip hubs and skip over North Carolina. We can't go on a pathway of just shutting down jobs, businesses, and putting people out of business. That's not the winning pathway. That's not how I believe we have become number one, and we remain number one. That takes us to zero.
Well,
And
speak to that point of it's going to go somewhere, right? I mean, again, that notion of trade-offs, if you ban a product, there is still, that doesn't mean demand goes away, right? So in some ways, you're sort of doubly taxing the resources of these rural communities that are now going to have to police an illicit substance. That seemed to weigh in to your remarks, your comments, your letter.
absolutely to the T. These are individuals who are engaging right now in a decision that they have made. And what I would simply say is when you just take the decision away through a ban, it's not going away. People are going to still engage if they want to. And so I believe that and let's acknowledge the administration has delayed now the decision. And I believe we need to continue to, examine and understand, this whole issue. And not only this, but again, people are going to engage. There becomes a black market. Not only that, but when we talk about, again, trying to maintain industries in the East, okay, let's try this. Let's try this. Get rid of agriculture, our leading industry in the state. Get rid of all of our military installations in the eastern part of the state. Get rid of the healthcare apparatus. I mean, tell me what much left is there.
Yeah, that's right.
We can't go down this road.
Yeah.
It's not the winning path.
Well, and following up on that note, Congressman Rouzer, I thought your comments, I love this turn of phrase. The tobacco industry itself has brought generations out of poverty, sent children to college, and solidified North Carolina as the epicenter of a global enterprise. I think a lot of folks don't realize, and with our campaign here, Our Ag Future, we talk about the legacy, the history of it. We talk about the livelihood, the fact that there are still folks in this industry, and then we talk about the future. That it seems to be a part of the future. And so just circle back to you again. You all sent the letter into the administration back in November. Frankly, just hats off for doing that and recognizing that this level of government intervention could frankly lead to job loss in Eastern North Carolina. Any other comment on that, Congressman Rouzer?
But I think it's important for people to know that as a result of the letter that Don and I sent, the administration pushed off this decision until later, and we still obviously have plenty of work to do to put the death nail in it. But hopefully that'll be the case. I just want to add one other thing. In North Carolina, and I explain this to my colleagues all the time, who aren't necessarily pro tobacco. And I tell them, I said, this is obviously not true in every single case, but in so many cases, our farm families in North Carolina, if they don't have a tobacco contract, they're not growing much else either. Or if they don't have a hog contract, they're not growing much else either. You take those two industries away, tobacco and hog production, and you'd lose a lot of sweet potato production, peanuts, soybeans, corn, everything else. Now, obviously, that's not true in every single case, but by and large, that's still pretty standardly true. So tobacco is in a year where a farmer's having a tough time. Tobacco's always managed to pay the bills. Same thing with that, hog contract.
That's right. Hog, poultry. I mean, in fact, I was talking to some lenders at one point, and they literally refer to a pork or a poultry contract as, quote, fixed income because it levels out all across the year. You generally they don't have to feel the swings because they're contractors as opposed to, pure market participants. And so that I think a lot of people take that for granted. I don't know if you'll acknowledge this, Congressman Rouzer, but I remember a phrase you used many years ago, and I've repeated it with regard to the tobacco industry. And it was something like, for crying out loud, even the Cubans, even the communists let you smoke. And so apparently we're looking at regulating more than our friends to the South. Do you acknowledge making that statement?
Yeah, I did make that. That was back in days when I was far more intelligent than I am now.
Years in Congress, I guess. Well, look,
Ray,
we've
if I could add
go ahead,
something, if
Congressman.
you
Yeah,
don't
sure.
mind. And I just want to chime in a little bit on this topic here in terms of health, okay? Because I think this is an important part of this as well. Uh, some want to look exclusively at physical health, but we are at the same time we're looking exclusively at physical health. We're ignoring economic wellness, and I believe when you look at total health, that when a person is able to um, go to work, afford to take care of their family, that is tied to greater wellness and health, looking at it from a much broader perspective. So, when we engage in this conversation, again, I want to come back to this whole notion of jobs, supporting the industry, because that's supporting families. That's how people, let's break this down. This is how people put food on the table. This is how they, are helping to get kids through school and so forth right now. So, and not only that, this is how they literally help provide for their physical health. So economic wellness is a part of this conversation as well, as it should be.
You're speaking our language. I mean, we talk about that here at the chamber quite a bit, that a job is about income and sort of economic stability, but think about all that comes with it. The American Enterprise Institute has done a ton of work on this, that it relates to, often your health care comes through your work, often your sense of community, and a lot of your friendships come through your work. I mentioned your income, but then, your purpose to some extent, contributing to the economy and being plugged in and having a place to go every day where you're contributing and making something. It all sort of fits under the same umbrella. Let me stay with you, Congressman Davis, and then to back to Congressman Rouzer. Obviously, this is not the only conversation happening in Washington at the moment, particularly in the ag space, where we care about the Farm Bill. There's a lot in that bill that impacts agriculture. Maybe give us a brief sort of take or update. And for you, Congressman Davis, in particular, you were a part of a group that went around and looked at this labor issue. I believe Chairman Thompson actually asked you to sort of help co-lead that process. Ag labor is not, frankly, under the jurisdiction of the Agriculture Committee in either chamber, the House or the Senate, which is perhaps part of our challenge in addressing it. But talk a little bit about your work on the Farm Bill, and then, Congressman Rouzer may have some inside information about the over-under on getting that done this year, and so I want to give him a chance to talk about that.
I'll tell you what, let me focus on the H2A part, the labor. We'll maybe let David jump in, give any insight on the Farm Bill, and I'm definitely glad to chime back in on the Farm Bill as well. But H2A, I'm really honored to be able to serve as the co-chair of our Ag Labor Working Group that was put in place by our chair. The chair realized this was a very important issue. I can tell you when I first came in to Congress, making my way around, listening to farmers, listening to those in the agriculture community, what kept coming up, believe it or not, I'm out trying to talk about the Farm Bill, and I keep hearing about labor, these rule changes. And I listened to so many, and essentially came back and really did a push to reach out to the Department of Labor. And I want to start with this part because I did eventually hear from the acting labor secretary, and we met, and I said, Madam Secretary, I just wanted to share with you exactly what I'm hearing. Because for me, it's important for the people of Eastern North Carolina to be seen, to be heard here in DC, not to feel that they're forgotten and left out. So I started by saying, hey, I'm just telling you what I'm hearing. People feel your heads are buried in the sand. Somebody in DC, they're just making decisions. They don't have a clue. And we need to be mindful that these decisions, they are creating a situation where many in the agriculture community, farmers, they don't know if they're going to be able to keep their businesses open. And we have to be mindful of this. And I will come back to the work then of this working group. That's why it's so important. We brought in witnesses after witness and listened to hear all aspects of the issue. And what the ultimate goal is to get to a product in the end, which we agree, in which we're able to make some meaningful changes, bipartisan supported efforts to modernize our H-2A program. It's not been modernized in decades, and we have to take a look at this now. We have to do things to help farmers, not make it more challenging, difficult. So we've had multiple hearings, and we actually released an interim report, and we're moving now towards a final report. Our timeline is towards February. Realizing again, we do not have jurisdiction. Part of what we're doing is still trying to amplify the issue here in Washington, D.C., so everyone will know that we're listening. And it's not a new issue entirely, but we can't just give up and, wave the white flag and surrender on this. We have to keep pushing, and that's indeed what we're doing. Would love, I know I've spoken a little bit because I'm really
thank you for the work you're doing in that space, and for again helping to carry the flag, because again it helps us make clear it's a bipartisan issue. Congressman Rouzer, you've worked on it for years. I think you've been frustrated a number of times about the lack of progress. Just talk maybe a word or two about where we are on H-2A and labor regulation, but definitely get to that question of the Farm Bill, which, by the way, we are taking questions online. I'm keeping an eye on those, and one of them literally speaks to this phrase that so many people in ag know so well, the AWAR, the adverse effect wage rate, that rising cost of labor every year. One of the questioners, a gentleman named Steve, has said, what can we do about it? How do we mitigate that? So talk about labor and again, your forecast on the Farm Bill, Congressman Rouzer.
Yeah, no, glad to do that. And I'm on that working group with Don and G.T. Thompson, our chairman of the House Ag Committee, appointed Don as a chair, as well as our friend Rick Crawford from Arkansas as a co-chair. And it's done some important work. Historically, agriculture has not always been on the same page when it came to H-2A reform. I think we're closer to being on the same page now than ever before. California versus everywhere else has always been a little bit of an issue. And one of the real focuses here, I think, has to be we got to have a product that all of agriculture can support 100%. And if we have that, that gives us a stepping stone to branch out and build a broader coalition of support to get a good bipartisan reform law signed into law. This has been an ongoing issue for a long time. You alluded to earlier my stint with Senator Helms. I had 2 different stints with Senator Helms, and I remember in 1998, Senator Helms, Senator Ted Kennedy, a number of Republicans and Democrats joined together on an immigration reform matter. It's not often that Kennedy and Helms, agreed on much. One was on one side, the other on the other side on most issues. But it spoke to the importance of getting meaningful change implemented. And quite honestly, politics has been played with this issue on both sides for a long time. And so anyhow, it's refreshing to see Republicans and Democrats come together on a fairly regular basis through the work of this task force to try to come up with a good product that can garner bipartisan support. But in particular, though, we've got to have all of agriculture, behind it. So I think that's one of the key efforts here that's being addressed. Labor Specifically, the AWR issue is top of mind for every producer out there in North Carolina. I think the adverse effect wage rate is going up about 92 cents or so, 93 cents, somewhere in there. In the state of Ohio, it's going up over $1 per hour. And in fact, Don, I ran into Dave Joyce tonight, and Dave Joyce is subcommittee chairman on approach for this particular issue is within his jurisdiction. Let me put it that way. And I talked to him specifically, and I've talked to him a couple of times, but I talked to him specifically again about a freeze, putting an AWR freeze in place, keep it at the 2023 level, so that our producers don't have to endure that extra financial burden, this coming crop year. Now that's a little bit of a long shot, but this again is an effort that's going to require a lot of bipartisan support if we're going to be able to get a freeze in the appropriations process. So, who knows if the House will be able to pass an appropriations bill? That's a whole nother question. Anybody who's been watching the news, we have a hard time keeping our ducks in a row, especially on my side of the aisle. But not only do we have to get it through the House, we've got to get it through the Senate, these appropriations bills. But if we can, and we can get this AWR freeze in there, that'll go a long ways to helping a lot of people. Farm bill, much the same thing. If we're going to have a good, strong farm bill, it's got to be bipartisan. I think Chairman G.T. Thompson has been very clear about that all throughout. We have a very tight margin in the House. We're down to what are we now? 218 to 213.
Yeah, but who's counting, Congressman Davis? Right? Nobody's really paying that much attention, are they?
So anyhow, yeah, I mean, it's as narrow a margin as Congress has ever had in the House, going back to 1917 and 1918.
Wow.
Believe that. So, or so I'm told. Somebody could be wrong on their stats. I'm just repeating what I've been told. But anyhow, it sounds good anyway. So, anyhow, I think it remains to be seen whether or not we can get a farm bill done. I'm not going to be surprised if it doesn't slip into late next year after the election, and possibly into the next Congress. Currently, we're under an extension until September 30th, as most people involved in production agriculture know. And so that's pretty much where that sits at the moment.
Well, for both of you, and I'm gonna, just to make sure we're able to go through a few more of folks' questions, I'll try to sort of keep us on track and maybe shorten our answers and responses here a little bit. But there's a lot of agriculture, a lot that touches agriculture out of Washington that isn't in the Farm Bill. I mean, we talked about the labor piece not technically being the Ag Committee's jurisdiction. A lot of the regulation of crop inputs is only partly or partially within the jurisdiction of the Ag Committee. When I think about the EPA, I think about the registration of all of these chemicals and things that are frankly very important in our production. I also think about the Waters of the United States rule. And of course, the administration had to take direction from the U.S. Supreme Court and presumably go back and sort of reissue a rule in a different light with hopefully a narrower jurisdiction. We know the American Farm Bureau, for example, has said it's still too broad, it's still overbroad, it doesn't actually comply, in their opinion, with the issues in the Supreme Court or the lines that were drawn by the U.S. Supreme Court. I just invite either of you in sort of summation fashion and quickly, Eastern North Carolina, both of the districts you represent, there's a lot of water. And if we have to start partitioning off parts of our fields to leave larger barriers, and frankly, not to be able to get water off the land that we would really like to produce food on, that's a challenge for the districts that you represent. Speak to that a moment, and is there hope that we'll finally find the right balance? Because obviously farmers and North Carolinians care about the environment, but there's also a need to operate and a need to have some consistency. And maybe let me stay with you, Congressman Rouzer, and then I'll go to Congressman Davis. But in a few words, maybe fewer than I took to ask the question. I apologize.
Well, it's a complicated issue to a large degree, so it's hard to keep it in a few words. But I am chairman of the Water Resources and Environment Subcommittee that has direct jurisdiction over the water component of EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers, generally speaking. And so we have been very, very much involved in this issue, including the CRA, the Congressional Review Act, that came out of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, went to the floor, had bipartisan support, not a lot of bipartisan support, but enough bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate to repeal that. And the administration took note, and I think the U.S. Supreme Court in particular took quite significant note that was a bipartisan CRA that passed, repealing that rule and regulation. So the Supreme Court, obviously, we felt like was very clear in their opinion, in their ruling. They specifically said this term "significant nexus" has no place. It's basically originated out of thin air years ago by a Supreme Court justice, and had been policy for a long time. Well, the administration, when they rewrote the rule, they got rid of the significant nexus verbiage, but they put in place a new rule that basically embodies as much of the old rule as they possibly could do. And so I think, unfortunately, I think it's going to require a little more litigation. Now, preferably and ideally, Congress could come together and clarify what a water of the U.S. is. But I'm afraid that there's just too much political division on this particular issue to be able to tell anybody with a straight face that that's a good avenue to take or a successful avenue. So I think it's going to require a little more litigation, but it is better than it was, which will take improvement over no improvement.
And it's again, Congressman Davis, it is a place where we feel it, right? We hear it. It's not academic in nature. It matters on the farms in Eastern North Carolina. Your take for a moment there.
I would sum it all on top of what David has shared, that a brighter future, especially in ag, it comes back to how we're deeply connected to our roots. And I mean that in that expression. I'm just coming up here, fighting for our farmers, even if it means going against your party and the president in the White House. I mean, we push back on what is to stand with the farmers. But you're so right. There's just so many aspects that are not necessarily inside of the Farm Bill that we have to continue to just keep an eye on and, be that voice for the people of North Carolina and in the East.
Well, we just looking at the questions we've gotten in, and I've heard this now being out in the field, this idea of North Carolina being the number one place to do business. I believe the statistic that I heard or read, I'm not sure how official it was, but maybe the number 2 or number 3 state in terms of growth. That there's another side of that coin for agriculture. And we've talked about the loss of farmland. We've talked about the need to educate folks of what I'm actually doing in the field and the fact that you're going to see and hear tractors and I'm going to be in your way from time to time. That's a big tension, right? And I think, frankly, that's happening in your districts, even in the rural parts. I was with a farmer yesterday that was saying he literally turned down the opportunity to tend a certain piece of land that was near a town because he just didn't want to put up with the phone calls from the new subdivision next door to it when they didn't understand what he was doing. It's probably asking too much, but what can we do? How do we achieve that right balance? And how do we try to, as members of Congress, how do we try to keep the peace, frankly, between all the folks that we're glad are coming here, that are strengthening our state and want to be a part of the prosperity we have, but also maintaining this industry that needs its open space and needs the ability to drive tractors down the road. I'll start with you, Congressman Davis, and then go to Congressman Rouzer. That question, by the way, was from a gentleman named Chaz. What possible protections do we have? How can we save this way of life?
I want to start and share 2 major things on this question that stand out to me. Number one, I believe it's imperative now more than ever that we look at the pipeline within agriculture. We have to ignite a pathway for young farmers to be able to come in and actually succeed. Part of that means to me, right, to the exact point we were talking about earlier, we have to make sure that we're not regulating ourselves out of business. But not only that, as we talk about the Farm Bill, continue to engage, with our, young people that are out there. For me, I went out and did multiple Farm Bill listening sessions, but one that really stood out to me that was really taken to heart is talking to classes of future farmers of America and really bringing them into the titles of the Farm Bill and the inner workings of how it all comes together. And I can tell you, it just sitting in a class for an hour and you see the light bulbs going off, we have to make these connections in a mighty way. When we talk again about the Farm Bill, there's still so many essential parts of it: crop insurance, obviously pricing, costs and supplies have been an issue that's lingered out there, research, marketing. But again, how do we reach young people going out to the classrooms? This is not just a saying that I've heard, I've witnessed. Now you went out to a pre-K class, and I was just curious how what were their perspectives? How did they formulate and think about agriculture? And I asked them that infamous question, where did food come from? And I heard McDonald's, Food Lion, I mean, you name it. And finally, we were in Greene County, so there's still hope. This young lady raised her hand and said, it comes from my daddy's farm. So we got to hold on to hope here. Okay, after all. But we have to cultivate an environment, and I'll share this last part of this statement, and that is, remember we were at one of the meetings where Zippy came in and actually spoke, and I began to ask this question, and we spoke after the hearing, and just really he shined the light in terms of, if it's not profitable, why would a young person come in? So we have to look at this. The second thing I would say, still being in Eastern North Carolina, that's imperative. We still have to look at infrastructure. Broadband, I think, is still huge. The delivery of that broadband, again, these are aspects of it. Labor, again, I believe, is a big part of this as well. We're going to have to move beyond our traditional ways of thinking here in order to make sure that agriculture remains a viable industry, not only for our state, but across America.
Well, I thought your pre-K reference was you were going to do some kind of comparison to the environment that you're in now, but you saved it. And thank goodness for that kid from Greene County. David, the development pressure, I mean, you see it. You represent Wilmington, you represent parts of Fayetteville, Lumberton, all up and down. You got 95 in your district, as does Congressman Davis. Tell me, what else do we need to be doing that we're not doing to try to make these things balance?
In Johnston County, where there's a McDonald's and housing developments, those were fields of tobacco. When I was working on the farm in the summers, spraying tobacco and helping barn tobacco and all that good stuff. So I remember Johnston County when I-40 stopped at exit 319. And, there's a lot of dirt roads that are now paved and got houses. And, so you really see the transition there. I think education, not only in the classroom, but to the broader public at large, I think in North Carolina, where you're going to continue to have significant population growth, I think the Farm Bureau and the Chamber and every other entity out there need to come together and focus in on an education program with just simple, easy to understand PFA books that that help people to understand what that tractor is doing, and agritourism I think is a great opportunity for a lot of folks who want to remain in agriculture, but quite frankly, because of the economies of scale that you got to have today. Can't do it as their number one occupation, might be their number two or number three occupation. But agritourism can be quite lucrative too, if it's in the right area and done the right way. And that's a great educational opportunity to help inform those who have gone to the state that don't know that much about agriculture, of course, as well as those who are native to the state that don't know as much about agriculture. So I think you got to come at this from a number of different perspectives, a number of different.
Turn it into a positive. Try to figure out that's a market, that's a potential opportunity there. It's an administrative matter. We're picking up some background noise from an iPhone that just called in. So whoever that individual is, if they'd be willing to mute so we can finish strong here. Gentlemen, you've been very generous with your time. We've talked about a lot of these regulatory threats against agriculture. We're almost out of time. There is apparently a basketball game that's going to start in a few minutes between the UNC Chapel Hill Carolina Tar Heels and the NC State Wolfpack. I do want to get your take on how you think that game might end, and let me see what kind of politicians you actually are. So, what's your take on the Wolfpack versus the Tar Heels this evening?
Well, hey, I'm going with the Wolfpack all the way. I'm loyal to a fault. So, given that's my alma mater, of course, I got plenty of Carolina fans in the district, but I made it known early on that I'm a Wolfpacker. They'll just have to deal with it. And
I think that's fair with 3 degrees.
Attributes that would convince them to vote for me.
Yeah. All right. What's an East Carolina man doing a night like tonight, Congressman Davis?
Ray, I am diehard. I'm going for ECU, even though we're not on the court.
Well played, sir.
And
well
it might be best we're not on either one of those courts with either one of those.
Well, very well played. None of us want to play you all in football, so for good reason. So, well, I'll give you both the last word. Thank you again for your time. I think obviously the democracy does not work unless our elected officials can communicate frequently and be in touch with our citizenry. In some way, that's easier today. In some ways, it's harder. You've both addressed this very sincerely. Grateful for what you're fighting for an industry that has long been important to the state. And that we believe here at the Chamber will continue to be important, and that's the tobacco industry and the production parts that go along with the farming parts of that. Maybe I'll come to you, Congressman Davis, and just ask for your last 90 seconds. I'll do the same with Congressman Rouzer, and we'll wrap up.
Yeah. Ray, let me first say thank you so much for bringing us together tonight, and to all those who are joining in. And David, I really appreciate working with you. You're a good friend, colleague, and it's an honor to be able to share North Carolina with you and our advocacy. I would say that this country board from Eastern North Carolina is here in the halls of Congress doing everything I can. I'm coming into a lot of these battles that many may have been in before. But nevertheless, my passion and desire to speak up and fight for Eastern North Carolina and our state means the world to me. And I hope that's, what everyone sees that I'm doing. We can't just tote our party banner all the time. We have to do, at the end of the day, what I believe is important. And that's fighting for our communities. That's fighting for Democrats, Republicans, independents, and ultimately on issues that are important. At the core of my interest is transforming the region, helping to restore hope that we can live the American dream in Eastern North Carolina. We don't have to leave. Business is flourishing. And to me, there's a lot of work ahead of us. So thank you again for bringing us together tonight. And I would love to end on the words that I've shared often before. The former AG chair, Cooley from Nash County, reminded us that, it's not necessarily bullets and bayonets that's our most powerful arsenal, but it's bread and butter.
I love it. I love it. Congressman Rouzer, closing thoughts. Thank you for being here as well.
Well, I want to commend Ray, you and the rest of you at the North Carolina Chamber for your interest and support of agriculture. It really speaks volumes that the North Carolina Chamber recognizes agriculture's importance And I think that's critical to the industry moving forward. That statewide organizations such as y'all are engaged. Really critical, in my opinion. Don, always great to see you. Look forward to seeing you on the floor tomorrow. Maybe we'll be able to get a rule off the floor. I don't know. But in any event, we work very closely on all these agriculture issues, all these issues that have an impact on agriculture, whether it's in the jurisdiction of the Ag Committee or not. It's important to our constituencies, and we will and very, very important, obviously, to Eastern North Carolina and our districts specifically. So we will continue to work on those issues. Nothing that we do in Congress is easy. To get anything passed in Congress, you got to have pretty strong, good bipartisan support, particularly if you're going to make it a lasting law. And this is really a critical time for American agriculture and for this country. And we really need to come together in as strong a bipartisan way as we possibly can to get these critical issues addressed across the board. Who knows what's going to happen internationally and in the next few months, over the next year, over the next 2 years. But if we can produce the food and fiber for the world, as well as ourselves, energy for ourselves and the world, we're in a much more dominant position than if we cannot. In fact, energy and food supply, there is no opportunity for prosperity if you don't have low-cost energy and you don't have low-cost food and fiber. And that's important to keep in perspective, particularly as it relates to all these rules and regulations, and the reason why Don and I joined together to push back against this nonsense, and we'll continue to do so. So again, Ray, great to be with you. Don, great to see you. Good to be with you tonight, and I hope this has been informative for those who are in the listening audience.
Yeah, and so thanks to that audience for tuning in. This has been recording, and is it available? Will be available to folks that want to go back and listen to it. So grateful for the audience, grateful for both of you gentlemen and the service that you are showing to our country. Thrilled that you're both on the Ag Committee. Best of luck to both of you. I will say, I think your office may need one of these. You'll both remember these from years ago. We passed out, North Carolina has pride in tobacco, and the chambers put a little spin on it that we still have pride in that industry. We're going to make sure you've got a stack of these in your offices to pass out to constituents, and anybody that's listening in, if you'll let us know. I love it, Congressman. If you'll let us know by giving us your email, we'd be glad to drop one of these in the mail to you as well. So thank you all for your time this evening. Godspeed, and go Wolfpack. Y'all have a good evening.
Oh, there we go.